Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe, and as always, I've got Sunny here with me. Let's dive right into this because Taiwan's political scene in 2025 feels like it's hit some serious turbulence.
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing what the people are calling a great recall wave, and it's affecting both sides.
Both major parties, right? The Kuomintang, you'll hear them called the KMT, and the Democratic Progressive Party, the DPP. They're both feeling the heat.
And what's really interesting, I think, is just the sheer number of these recall efforts happening and the way the parties are reacting.
Totally. It suggests something maybe deeper than the usual political back and forth.
It could be a much deeper level of tension.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, our mission is pretty straightforward. What's the deal with all these recalls? We've got a good stack of sources here, news from Win Media, TVBS, NL News, and some compiled info from, various Taiwanese outlets and Wikipedia trying to get the whole picture.
A multifaceted view, yeah.
Right now, it looks like a whole bunch of KMT legislators are facing recall, and the KMT's response, led by Chairman Eric Chu, they've announced they want to recall President Ching-te.
Wow, okay. Talk about escalating things fast.
Seriously. So this brings up the big question right away. Is this like a genuine wave of public anger hitting everyone, or is there a more strategic political game being played?
That's what we need to unpack.
Okay, let's start with the KMT's move. Why try to recall President Lai? Now News reported Eric Chu was pretty blunt about it.
What did he say?
He announced a street action to recall Lai Ching-te for April 26th and stated very clearly the real great recall is to recall Lai Ching-te. He even called the situation a critical and dangerous moment and talked about taking down Lai Ching-te.
Strong language. And you have to connect that, obviously, to the fact that the KMT themselves are facing, 34 recalls against their own legislators.
Yeah, Focus Taiwan reported 34. That's a massive 65% of their seats.
So it feels at least partly like a direct countermove, a kind of, you come after our guys, we go after your leader, retaliation.
Makes sense. A political tit for tat. But digging a bit deeper, maybe it's also about trying to, change the narrative, shift the focus.
Right. If everyone's talking about recalling the president, maybe there's less focus on why those KMT legislators are facing recalls in the first place. It could weaken the DPP's executive power, too.
And protect their own influence in the legislature. It's a classic political deflection strategy, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you also have to consider their base. This kind of aggressive action could really energize KMT supporters.
Especially those with, say, stronger pro-China views or just generally anti-DPP feelings.
Exactly. We've seen some of that anti-green communist rhetoric floating around. Framing the DPP as a threat, that can be a powerful motivator for your core voters.
Right. Tapping into those deeper ideological splits. And policy disagreements are definitely part of it, too, it seems.
Oh, for sure. The KMT has been quite critical of Lai Ching-te's policies.
Like strengthening ties with the U.S., pushing for a nuclear-free Taiwan. Things that the KMT labels pro-U.S. and anti-China or ideology-driven.
Whereas the KMT generally prefers a, let's say, more moderate approach in cross-strait relations with Beijing, It highlights those fundamental differences in vision.
And maybe there's a long game here, too. Thinking about future elections.
Could be. By highlighting any controversies around the Lai administration, like those electricity price hikes we heard about, or other economic pressures they might be trying to shape public opinion.
Laying the groundwork for the 2026 local elections, and then the big one, the 2028 presidential race.
Precisely. That call by Eric Chu for the big rally on Ketagalan Boulevard, that feels like an attempt to mobilize, create momentum, show strength.
Build that narrative that they're the leading opposition force.
Yeah, but, and this is a big but, actually recalling a president in Taiwan, it's incredibly difficult.
You're telling me? TVBS News broke down the hurdles and, wow, the bar is set really high.
How high are we talking?
Well, first you need 29 legislators just to propose it. Then you need 76 legislators to agree to it.
Okay, that's already tough given the current legislative makeup.
And then it goes to a national referendum. And get this, you need over half of all eligible citizens, that's about 9.77 million people, to vote yes.
Okay, yeah, that's a monumental task, a political Hail Mary, like you said.
Exactly. The threshold is deliberately high to prevent exactly this kind of politically motivated recall against the top office.
And there's always the chance of internal KMT disagreement, too, right? Not everyone in the party might think this is the smartest strategy.
Good point. Internal divisions could really undermine the effort. And there's the risk it just blows back on them.
How so?
Well, if the public sees this as just political gamesmanship, creating instability. It could alienate moderate voters, damage the KMT's image even more.
That's critical. Public perception here is key. If it looks like destabilizing sour grapes rather than a legitimate concern, it could really backfire.
Okay, so we have a handle on why the KMT is pushing this, even if it's a long shot. But let's flip it. Why are so many KMT legislators facing recall in the first place from the public?
Right, because the KMT narrative is that the DPP is orchestrating it all.
Exactly. They're pointing the finger directly at the DPP, saying it's not genuine public anger. So what are the reasons these KMT folks are in the hot seat?
Well, the sources point strongly towards public anger over those budget cuts. The ones passed by the KMT and the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, late in 2024.
The diplomat mentioned those, right? Big numbers.
Huge. NT $207.6 billion in cuts. And some specific ones really hit home, apparently, like canceling a massive NT $100 billion subsidy for Taipower, the state electricity company.
Okay, so that likely connects directly to those electricity price hikes people were feeling.
Seems very likely. And they also froze, 73% of the presidential office's operating budget?
73%. Yeah, that doesn't exactly scream responsible governance to the average person, does it?
Probably not. And by March 2025, like you said, Focus Taiwan reported 34 KMT legislators facing recall efforts. That's a significant number.
It really is. And it wasn't just random anger, right? There was organization behind it.
Definitely. Civic movements were key. Robert Tso's Safeguard Taiwan Anti-Communist Volunteer Alliance is mentioned as providing resources and networks.
Helping coordinate things.
Yeah. And Focus Taiwan also mentioned that big anti-unification Defend Taiwan rally in April 2025. About 55,000 people showed up.
Wow, 55,000. That shows pretty significant citizen mobilization. Real grassroots energy there.
It does. And there's another factor. Some of these KMT legislators might have been vulnerable anyway.
How so?
Well, some sources suggest their wins in the 2024 legislative elections were actually quite narrow in certain districts, maybe due to vote splitting.
Ah, right, where multiple candidates split the vote on one side, letting the other side win with maybe less than 50%?
Exactly. So if you won narrowly and then you back unpopular policies like those budget cuts, well, you don't have much cushion. It makes you a prime target for a recall.
So it really sounds like there are solid, concrete reasons for public dissatisfaction driving these recalls against the KMT legislators.
It certainly appears that way.
So then why is the KMT so adamant about blaming the DPP? Why point the finger solely at their rivals?
Well, politically, it's a useful strategy, isn't it? Shift the blame. Reframe the narrative.
Avoid taking responsibility for the fallout from their own policies, like the budget cuts.
Precisely. Eric Chu called the recalls a disgrace to democracy, according to Focus Taiwan. He accused the DPP of basically trying to undo the results of the January 2024 election via recall.
So, playing the victim, essentially, saying, it's not our fault, it's the other guys undermining democracy.
That seems to be the angle, and to be fair, they do have something to point to.
What's that?
Focus Taiwan also reported that the DPP's own legislative caucus whip, Kurd Ming, had publicly called for a large-scale recall of 41 opposition lawmakers earlier in 2025.
Ah, okay, so the KMT can say, see? They said they wanted to do this? Okay. Gives them some ammunition for their claim?
It does. It feeds into that narrative that this isn't grassroots anger, but a top-down DPP plot.
So it becomes a political blame game, each side trying to paint the other as the bad actor. And, like with the presidential recall attempt, maybe the KMT is also trying to rally their own base with this.
Absolutely. Using that anti-green communist rhetoric again, portraying the DPP as the instigators trying to overturn election results, that can really fire up their core supporters, create a sense of crisis.
Right. Identify a common enemy. But is there a risk they're, misreading the room? Maybe underestimating the actual public anger over the cuts?
That's a definite possibility. If they attribute it all to a DPP conspiracy, they risk looking out of touch with genuine public sentiment, especially among those directly affected by the budget decisions.
Okay, so weighing it up, it sounds like the evidence suggests these recall movements against KMT legislators are mostly driven by real public anger and organized civic groups.
Rooted in policy decisions, maybe perceived pro-China stances.
And while the DPP has clearly supported these recalls, maybe even encouraged them, the KMT blaming them entirely feels more like a political tactic.
It looks like a strategy to deflect responsibility and mobilize their base, yeah. But, like we said about the presidential recall, it's a strategy that could alienate moderate voters who might genuinely agree with the reasons for the recalls.
It's a fine line to walk.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the KMT's push against lie and the recalls against the KMT legislators, including the blame game. What about some of the broader context, unaddressed issues?
Yeah, there's definitely more layers here. The socioeconomic context is huge.
You mean things like the economy impacting people's views?
Exactly. The Diplomat highlighted those rising electricity prices again, linked to that Thai power subsidy cut and just general inflation.
Yeah.
That puts pressure on families, on small businesses.
And when people feel squeezed financially, they often look for someone to blame, right? Or at least demand accountability from leaders.
Absolutely. And there might be a generational thing happening too. Some sources mention frustration among younger voters.
About what specifically?
Things like youth unemployment, the high cost of housing, issues that disproportionately affect them. Participating in recall efforts could be a way to voice that broader discontent.
So it's not just about the specific budget cuts, but maybe a wider feeling that the system isn't working for them, especially younger generations?
Could be. It might reflect some underlying class or generational divides, A feeling, perhaps, that KMT policies tend to favor big business or pro-China interests over the average person.
That makes a lot of sense. What about the media and, information or maybe disinformation playing a role?
Oh, definitely. That's almost always a factor these days. Sources point to significant online mobilization alongside the recall efforts.
Social media amplifying controversies, getting people engaged.
Yeah, and remember Robert Sau's Alliance. They apparently provided digital tools to help with signature gathering, making it easier to organize online.
So traditional grassroots plus digital tools. A potent combination.
For sure. And on the flip side, the KMT is accusing the DPP of manipulating media, engaging in cognitive warfare.
The familiar refrain of the other side controlling the narrative, waging an info war.
Exactly. And we can't ignore the potential impact of just outright disinformation or really inflammatory rhetoric.
Like those accusations mentioned about KMT members raising 5-star flags.
Yeah, things like that. Whether true or not, that kind of stuff can really pour fuel on the fire and deepen the polarization.
So the information space sounds pretty contested, pretty heated. Now, stepping back even further, what about the international angle? Geopolitics.
That's definitely hovering over all of this. The recall movement itself is sometimes framed as anti-unification.
Meaning opposing closer ties or eventual unification with mainland China.
Right, and that ties directly into global concerns about China's influence over Taiwan. The KMT is generally perceived as more Beijing-friendly, which makes them a target in that context.
While the DPP is seen as more independence-leaning. So domestic politics gets tangled up with these huge geopolitical stakes.
Absolutely. International media, like The Diplomat, are watching this political turmoil. That kind of instability could potentially affect things like foreign investment or even Taiwan's critical relationship with the U.S.
And is there a concern about how Beijing might react?
There's always that underlying worry, yeah. Some sources hint at the risk that China could try to exploit any instability in Taiwan as a pretext for intervention. That obviously ramps up the geopolitical risk significantly.
A sobering thought. It really underscores how high the stakes are. Okay, one last area maybe. The recall process itself. Any legal or ethical debates around that?
Yes, actually. There were amendments made to the recall law, the Public Officials Election and Recall Act, in April 2025.
Oh, what changed?
They tightened the rules. Things like requiring copies of national ID cards with signatures, stricter penalties for forging signatures.
Okay, so making it harder to initiate a recall.
Effectively, yes. And the parties framed it differently, of course. The DPP tended to say it protects democracy from frivolous attempts, while the KMT argued it restricts citizens' rights to hold officials accountable.
So even the rules of the game are a point of political contention.
Seems so. And beyond the legal specifics, there are broader ethical questions being raised.
Like what?
Like whether having too many recalls, especially if they seem purely politically motivated, could undermine the whole idea of elections. Could it lead to democracy fatigue? Could it just destabilize everything?
It's that classic tension, isn't it? Accountability versus stability.
Yeah.
Recall is a tool for accountability, but it can be misused.
Weaponized for partisan gain, potentially leading to constant political turn. Finding the right balance is tricky.
Definitely. And finally, do we know where President Lai himself stands on all this, particularly the recalls targeting the KMT?
We do have a hint from Wind Media. Apparently, at a DPP Central Standing Committee meeting, they played a promotional video.
A video? About what?
It was called Stand Up Bravely, Leave Your Name for Taiwan. And it explicitly urged people to sign recall petitions against KMT legislators.
Whoa.
Yeah, it characterized those legislators as inclined towards China and disrupting constitutional governance. Pretty strong stuff.
So basically an official party endorsement of the recall efforts against their opponents.
It certainly looks that way. And President Lei reportedly said the video was very well made.
Okay, that's a pretty clear signal of support for putting pressure on the KMT via recalls.
It is. But, again, important to note, this was about the recalls aimed at KMT legislators, not a direct comment on the recall effort potentially targeting him.
Right. A subtle but important distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground on this great recall wave in Taiwan.
Yeah.
It's clearly very complex.
It really is. You see this intricate mix of genuine public anger over specific policies, like the budget cuts.
Mixed with calculated political strategies from both the KMT and the DPP.
And all underpinned by those deep, fundamental ideological divides about Taiwan's future and its relationship with China.
It definitely feels like more than just a temporary storm. This recall wave seems like a really significant moment.
Yeah, it could genuinely shift the balance of power in the legislature. And you have to think it'll have ripple effects on future elections, too.
The consequences could linger for quite a while.
Absolutely.
So, as you, the listener, process all this, maybe think about that broader question. What is the right role for recall mechanisms in a democracy? How do you balance holding politicians accountable with the need for some level of political stability?
And how do you prevent these tools from just becoming weapons in partisan warfare?
Exactly. There are no easy answers. It really highlights the complexities of democratic governance. We definitely encourage you to keep following this, look at news from different sources, and form your own informed opinions as this whole situation continues to develop in Taiwan. I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. We actually touched on Taiwan's politics before, and this feels like, the next big chapter.
Exactly. Yeah, we were looking at how things were evolving, and now, boom, this huge push to recall members of the Kuomintang KMT.
Mm-hmm. Based on what we found.
Understanding the why behind it all.
Precisely. What's driving this whole movement?
One of the first things that really jumps out from the sources, it's the age of the people involved. It seems like, a lot of the energy is coming from people under 30.
Absolutely. That's a key point in the reports. They really highlight the enthusiasm of this younger generation for getting politically involved. They're not just, sitting back.
No, definitely not. They're active.
Very active. And their main concerns, from what we've read, seem to revolve around the KMT's legislative record and, importantly, what they perceive as national security risks.
Right, which kind of leads us to the bigger picture, the political context. It sounds a bit complex, this term, WINJ, minority government, majority opposition. Can you break that down a bit for us?
Sure. So after the 2024 elections, no single party got a clear majority in the legislature. You ended up with the DPP holding the presidency, the executive branch, but the KMT, often working with the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, they control the legislature.
Ah, okay. So a split.
Exactly. A split. And this, according to our sources, has led to, a lot of legislative conflict, gridlock sometimes, and it's definitely fueled these recall efforts. Many seem to have been started by the DPP targeting, big KMT names.
Like Han Kuo-yu, the legislative yuan president, and Chiang Chi-chen, the deputy speaker. I think I remember reading that.
Those are the ones, exactly. And then the KMT fired back with their own strategy, this, a comprehensive recall plan.
Wow, okay. So that just escalates things.
Oh, definitely. It really ramped up the political polarization. It became less about specific issues and more like an all-out political battle.
So it sounds like it goes deeper than just squabbles over politicians. It's tapping into some, fundamental divisions in Taiwanese society.
That's a really crucial point, yeah. The sources we looked at strongly suggest this recall movement is, you might say, a symptom of these deeper disagreements. Disagreements about core democratic values, about national security, and crucially about Taiwan's relationship with China, cross-strait relations.
In that editorial you mentioned, the one in the United Daily News from just a few days ago, April 20th, criticizing the whole thing for causing political chaos. That really underlines how intense it's all become, doesn't it?
It really does. Paints a stark picture, the level of political friction this whole wave has stirred up. Okay, so maybe we should dig into some of the specific reasons driving these recalls against the KMT.
Yeah, let's do that. One of the main drivers the sources point to.
Well, the first big one seems to be this perception. The feeling among many citizens that the KMT is, well, too close to China. And maybe not strongly anti-communist enough.
That's interesting, especially given the KMT's history, right? They were historically very anti-communist.
Exactly. That's the contrast that's so striking. Historically, yes, staunchly anti-communist. But now the perception, according to the info we have, is this growing concern that the parties become too aligned, maybe even acting like a spokesperson for the CCP in some people's eyes.
Wow. And that incident, the Chinese influencer who got deported for promoting unification, that seemed to really pour fuel on the fire.
It seems like it did. The handling of that incident and the perception, right or wrong, that the KMT's reaction showed a lack of firm opposition to communism, maybe even signaling vulnerability to CCP influence.
Yeah.
That really struck a nerve.
Especially for those already worried.
Right. It sort of crystallized those existing anxieties for a lot of people. Just for context, was this online figure really pushing unification hard, and her deportation brought up all these questions about free speech versus, national security.
Okay, so that's one major factor.
Yeah.
What else? Budget cuts were mentioned, potentially hitting defense spending. That sounds pretty serious.
It is, yeah, a really concrete issue. The sources point to the KMT working with the TPP back in January 2025, being involved in cutting the central government budget by NT $200 billion. It's a significant chunk of change.
$200 billion. Wow.
Yeah. And the big worry is obviously how this could impact Taiwan's defense. Could it weaken their capabilities, slow down modernization, make them more vulnerable to, a potential Chinese invasion?
I can absolutely see why that would set off major alarm bells, especially with everything going on in the region. Okay, what about the other contributing factors? There were a few mentioned.
Right. These are also key pieces. There was the National Assembly reform bill back in May 2024, and then changes to the recall laws themselves in December. Both were really controversial.
Controversial how?
Well, they sparked these big public protests, the Bluebird movement. Many people saw these legislative moves as, frankly, undemocratic. The reform bill changed legislative powers and oversight, and critics said it was rushed, without enough debate.
And the recall law changes.
Those altered the rules for recalling officials, the thresholds and procedures. Again, raising concerns about making accountability harder, perhaps.
So it wasn't just about China or the military budget. There were these real, domestic political anxieties about the health of their own democracy.
Precisely. And the budget cuts weren't just defense either. They apparently also touched areas impacting people's daily lives, like welfare programs for parents, for laborers, maybe less directly affecting students, but the overall feeling of reduced social support likely added to the dissatisfaction.
It sounds like there's this underlying fear that the KMT's actions, their overall direction, could actually be damaging Taiwan's democracy. People even comparing it to Hong Kong.
That comparison comes up, yeah. It's powerful and resonates deeply there. This feeling that important laws were pushed through in ways some see as, quote, political fraud. It fuels calls for a return to a professional parliament, a desire for more thoughtful, less partisan lawmaking.
And there's also something about support for Chinese individuals in Taiwan, pushing for unification by force.
Yes, that concern is also part of the mix. The perception that the KMT might be overly sympathetic to individuals advocating unification, particularly through forceful means, feeds into this broader anxiety about, eroding democratic norms and unwelcome external influence.
Okay, and just the scale of this whole thing?
Yeah.
It's pretty massive, isn't it? 59 recall cases getting to the second stage, the signature stage, by mid-April, and a lot of those aimed at the KMT.
The sheer number, 59, it's significant. It points to a pretty widespread current of discontent in certain parts of the population. And the fact that 34 of those target KMT legislators really highlights where the focus of that discontent lies.
And it's driven by civic groups.
Largely, yes. Grassroots efforts with lots of involvement from, again, younger people and also women. It really seems like a bottom-up kind of movement in many ways.
Okay, so let me try and recap. It feels like this great recall wave against the KMT stems from this potent mix of, first, the perception they're too close to China, not anti-communist enough. Second, these budget cuts potentially hurting defense. Third, these controversial laws seen as undermining democracy. And fourth, just these broader worries about democratic values and maybe Taiwan's future path. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary of the key drivers we've picked up from the sources. But it's crucial to remember, like we said, these are complex issues. There are diverse views within Taiwan, and there's rarely just one simple answer, you know?
Absolutely. No easy answers here. Which kind of brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about all these motivations we've just talked through, the China stance, the budget, the democratic process concerns, what do you think the long-term ripple effects of this great recall wave might actually be? You know, for Taiwan's own political landscape, but also for its relationship with the rest of the world. It's definitely something to chew on.
It really is. A huge question about Taiwan's future direction, both internally and globally.
Well, thanks for diving deep with us on this one. It's a really important, complex situation.
Definitely. It's been very insightful unpacking it all.
And hey, if you want to keep up with these kinds of in-depth discussions on what's happening around the world, make sure you subscribe to Sip and Talk.
Yeah, don't miss out.
We'll catch you on the next one.